Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this wonderful special event, and thank you for joining us. My name is Raquel Lopes, and I am a graduate of the class of 1989 and a member of the reunion committee. And as a quick reminder, this online event enables an attendee to participate through a personal device's microphone and/or camera. An attendee may elect not to participate through the use of a microphone and/or camera, and this election of an attendee to use a microphone and/or camera constitutes a release and waiver of rights in the capture of the attendee's image, likeness, and/or voice for the exclusive use by Barnard College. Well, today we have the opportunity to learn more about community engagement at Barnard and Undesign the Redline at Barnard, an interactive exhibition combining history, art, and storytelling with a community outreach and collaboration in order to reckon with the systematic racism by examining the legacy of redlining in Barnard and Columbia's neighborhood. We're joined today by very special guests, and here I am to introduce them. Cammie Jones serves as the Executive Director of Community Engagement and Inclusion at Barnard College. This role is a position of leadership charged with the developing the college's approach to civic and community engagement through facilitating relationships between the college, community leaders, and stakeholders across the city, as well as in Harlem. Originally from Dallas, Texas, Ms. Jones has consistently created pathways towards social justice and civic engagement in the world of higher education for over 13 years. And through her career, Ms. Jones has spoken on national and international panels about the importance of civic engagement, women's rights, and equity and inclusion. As a first-generation college student, she holds a BA in kinesiology from the University of Texas at Austin and an MA in higher education administration from Louisiana State University. She has received numerous awards for her work in higher education and community engagement, and has coordinated several global and domestic summits on civic engagement, youth action leadership development, and the future of women's rights. Miriam Neptune is the Director of Teaching, Learning, and Digital Scholarship as interim co-dean at the Barnard Library. She comes to librarianship from filmmaking and teaching media production. Over the past 10 years, she has worked at both Smith College and Barnard College libraries, creating digital projects and exhibitions that celebrate and highlight the intellectual work, archives, and lived experiences of groups that have been historically silenced in the academy. Professor Mary Rocco teaches the Urban Studies program at Barnard College. Trained as a city planner, her research examines the role of community organizations and philanthropy in urban revitalization and neighborhood development. For the past year, Professor Rocco and her students have been working in solidarity with the Bronx Cooperative Development Initiative as they develop a Bronx-wide community planning platform. Last month, Professor Rocco was awarded the Barnard Excellence in Teaching Award. Cammie, Miriam, and Mary, thank you so much for joining us today. And with that, I turn it over to Cammie.
Thank you so much, Raquel. It was just lovely to hear about the great work that the women are doing at the institution. The first thing I'm going to do is I would like to say the fun part of any presentation, and that is sharing my screen. As we all know, that brings a lot of fun into things with presentations, but I'm happy to be here. My name is Cammie Jones. My pronouns are she, her. and I serve as the Executive Director of Community Engagement and Inclusion at Barnard. This is a role that was launched 4 months ago, actually, on the first day of Black History Month, which I feel is very important and a part of the foundation of this office. In regards to the Office of Community Engagement and Inclusion, this is a space which strengthens, connects, and fosters an ecosystem of civic engagement for Barnard, and as was mentioned in the introduction, Harlem and the city through innovative and authentic and lasting engagement opportunities. Throughout these past few months, because I want to give you an overview of what's being done and some of our goals and models that we're implementing. We've had a lot of different meetings and forums with students and faculty and staff and alumni and the Harlem community to really discuss how do we create an engaged environment which welcomes mutually beneficial exchanges of knowledge and resources in a context of sustainable partnership, but also reciprocity and community building, which is really key when you look at the definition of what community engagement is. Within this office, we are focusing on 5 specific thematic areas of connectedness, especially for this next academic year, which will strengthen the coordination of community and civic engagement by creating mechanisms to increase the knowledge and navigation of community engagement internally within the institution, but also thinking about externally in the community. And they're the following. This office really wants to go into depth around how do we expand community engagement awareness? How do we actually provide civic skills building development opportunities across the institution, whether it's academic, extracurricular, co-curricular? And then as we think about where we're located, how do we amplify equitable and collaborative relationships within the Harlem community? Because this office is within the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And as we're thinking about these relationships, we want to honor the community. We want to sustain our partnerships. We also want to be a part of that promotion of developing economic development opportunities for our community in Harlem. In order to do this, as you'll see at the bottom of this first slide, is that there's a continuum model of engagement that I feel is really important into doing this work. The office is actually focusing on 2 models, I would say. The first being a continuum model. This model allows us to think deeply on how we create an institutional culture around civic engagement that is aligned with community identified needs, which is very key to this work. This model is going to shift us from this space of individually understanding and doing and moving towards realizing the importance of collective impact work, which you'll hear about with the Redline Project, because this is really important so that we can have a strong foundation that is sustained in everything that we do. And you probably have seen a lot of this, especially during the pandemic, where it's been grassroots. The community has come together in regards to supporting each other to get to this part of a post-pandemic era, which is really key. So I'm gonna go to the next slide to go into a little more depth. And as an institution that's committed to innovative, bold thinking, teaching, learning, and community engagement, some key goals to the office is that we want to create an institutional infrastructure and culture that promotes community engagement. We want to make sure that we have a range of engagement opportunities and development and training across the board. We want to make sure we're cultivating knowledge and resources and providing relationships to advance the well-being of our communities and our holistic spirits. And then above all else, we want to make sure this work is coordinated, it's expanded, and it's comprehensive. And those are the foundational pieces of the office. But I think about the pandemic and I think about the impact that it's done to these communities and how do we come out of this whole? And when I think about the impacts of this work, you'll see on the slide here that there is a model that talks about the impacts of community engagement. And that's going to be really important because this model describes the outcomes that result from authentic community engagement. This is a key value of this office within Barnard and externally. And within this model, as you look at the circle, the outer circle outcomes, they focus on the tangible, visible goals of this work around community engagement and the members that are doing this work. These are the outcomes and concerns that you may hear in a classroom, in a student org meeting, in a community board meeting, probably in some of the forums that you've attended this week. This shapes our outcomes, this shapes our conversations and our outreach around engagement, public policy, programming. There has to be a crossover, though, in regards to internal and external engagement. That's why this model is important. And if you look further within the circle, the inner piece, this model focuses on the outcomes. So there's healing that has to occur post-pandemic, the identity of who we are, the relationship building, the shifting of the culture. This is all achieved in the process of doing the work together, which are foundational elements of not just community engagement, but a healthy community. The healthy community needs resources and access to that. And so as our communities have changed immensely, both at Barnard and Harlem during this pandemic, it's going to take a lot of effort for us to heal, reacclimate, and re-engage, and think about empathic and active listening and dialogue that's needed to disentangle and understand who we are now, what our communities need, what outcomes do our students want to capture, and how do we answer some of the poignant questions today in regards to equity, inclusion, and social justice. Civic engagement is just one piece, I would say, to this puzzle, but also civic engagement is a center point that comes into this space to actively create the modalities to do this work in connection with our goals for not only this office, but the institution. And so some of the things that the office has done, I've listed some initiatives that are coming up on the bottom, but there's a few things that have been key for this office. We've created an advisory committee to help with outlining the office strategic plan with key campus stakeholders for the upcoming year, which will lead to institutionalizing a campus-wide civic action plan. We've launched a Barnard Engage Pathline program alongside faculty, which will foster, promote, and explore the pedagogy of experiential learning by cultivating an engaged learning environment with not only faculty, but our community partners, and expanding those courses and the work that we do. And this will assist faculty as we create a pipeline for those that are interested in joining this program. We've also this year have partnered with the Black Women's Health Imperative to provide holistic health focused activism circles and forums for the students as they begin to re-engage with their communities. Activism is selfless work. It's a long haul, I would say, and it's important that we teach and model different aspects of care in regards to engagement in the community. We've co-sponsored different events around Earth Day and sustainability and connecting with Morningside Park on engagement activities. We've also launched a STEAM in a City program. This is a new project in partnership with the Friends of Morningside Park, Manhattan Borough's President's Office, Gail Brewer, as well as several schools in Harlem, specifically K through 8, to provide pedagogical instruction for Barnard environmental scientists, architects, and artists, I would say. It's going to work with these teachers to translate research into dynamic experiential learning. So this is going to lead to us really opening the gates and allowing for K through 8 teachers to learn from our faculty and then apply that learning in living labs within the community. You probably have attended some of our community conversations. This started in April. We actually had alumna Angela Rose Myers, and we recently just hosted Congresswoman Grace Ming for the conclusion of the AAPI Heritage Month. We also have actually collaborated with alumna Leslie Duvall. She actually is the co-owner of Street Lab. This is an opportunity to provide STEAM learning and engagement for kids throughout the city. And we have also launched several course modules to educate the Barnard community around AAPI month, Earth Week, voter engagement, and the primaries that are coming up. We're just finding really key ways and initiatives to engage with students, I would say, in our community during this hybrid moment, but we're also transitioning to preparing for the fall semester with continuing with our dialogue series and thinking about activism and action to make sure that we have an advocacy and policy subdivision and really making sure that we have sustained student leadership opportunities as well. Not over programming, but thinking about what are we already doing and how can we build from that and expand and collaborate with our campus partners. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point because I want to transition to the second part of this, because one of the exciting aspects of this role, I would say, is the work that we're doing and will continue to do with the Harlem community in Morningside Heights. Is really imperative right now that, as I mentioned, we re-enter and engage with our communities, that we are mindful of the pandemic's impact and how that's connected to years of systemic racism. And it's important that we educate ourselves on the continued impact of racial injustice in our community, which is what you're going to learn about today. Following me, we have two innovative leaders and colleagues from Barnard who have led in the efforts of Undesign the Redline. As mentioned earlier, it's an interactive exhibit, and it combines history and art and storytelling and all the amazing things that build community, so that we can reckon with systemic racism. This project provides a unique opportunity to examine the othering, I would say, of demographics. It also provides a pure example of what community engagement can look like from a space of respect for those impacted, understanding and acknowledging the real history in our communities with the focus of sustained development and education, awareness, and action. So it is my honor to transition this program over to Miriam and Mary as they go into Undesign the Redline.
Thank you, Cammie. It's so great to hear about all of the work and impact you've been making, all the work that your office is doing, and we're excited that you are here on campus, the virtual campus. So I'll get us started. I'm going to share my screen and hope that it goes as planned. You never know. Okay, great. Erica, can you confirm that you see everything? No, something just happened to my screen, as I feared. Strange. I'm gonna unshare. Go ahead. Oh, I'm gonna share again. Okay, great. Wow, I literally pressed a button and lost my window. Give me one moment, please. I'm gonna.
Miriam, do you want me to try to share my screen?
Yes, please.
Okay, let me go ahead and do that. Oh, there it is. Oh no, there it's not. Okay.
Okay.
Are you?
Not sure what happened there, but I'm gonna go ahead with our planned slides. And Mary,
Yes.
are you sharing?
Yeah, I'm sharing. Just one second. There we are.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so Undesign the Redline is an exhibit, but it's also really an experience. It's in the form of an installation, which was created by the social justice design firm Designing the We. It's traveled across the country. It's been mounted at Harvard Kennedy School of Government and Boston Architectural College, city halls in Dallas and Los Angeles. It's been hosted by community organizations in Baltimore, Cleveland, New Orleans, and dozens of other locations, I think 35 in total. The exhibit presents archival evidence of the history of redlining policy and situates that history in a timeline extending from the Reconstruction era to the current day. Each version of the exhibit is customized to connect this history with the immediate environment or location. Next slide. So the Barnard Undesign project began with an invitation to members of my team in the library and then to a group of 10 faculty and staff over a year ago, actually almost a year and a half ago. Mary Rocco, my collaborator here, has become an incredible partner in this project because the work corresponds so much with the teaching she already does on neighborhood change and shrinking cities and other topics in her urban studies courses. We have grown to a cohort of 26 people who are comprised of faculty, students, staff, and community members. You can read all of the names on our website, which is here on the slide, undesign.dhcbarnard.edu. We're humanists, social scientists, environmental scientists, students, public housing activists, arts educators, librarians, archivists, and more. And we have all found our personal connection to this topic. Oh. And now we found our slide. So we'd hoped to mount the exhibit last fall, but of course, COVID made that hard and nearly impossible. So we instead started a monthly reading group to educate ourselves more about the topics connected to redlining history. And we'll get into what redlining is in a moment. So the reading group has been open to the public on Zoom, thanks to a grant from Humanities New York, and has met 8 times since last summer around this time. And through the reading group, we highlight and connect to our library's resources. We share a pool of scholarship that's sort of crowdsourced from everyone who participates. And we invite the larger network of community experts that we know to help us explore and understand the questions that have been most pressing to us. For example, how is the legacy of redlining showing up in our experiences of extreme weather and climate change? And we will go further into some of those questions in our presentation with you today. So next slide. I want to, before we move on, really thank our sponsors and collaborators. We've been lucky to receive generous support from several departments on campus who are listed here, including the Urban Studies Program, BCRW, the Center for Engaged Pedagogy, and also the many hours of support from our Barnard's wonderful fundraising and development team, Kari, Leanne, and Kayla, who are all wonderful people who really understood our objective of connecting this project to the library's social justice commitment and the value of community engagement on campus, the importance of confronting history to understand the present. They've helped us talk about that, and they're helping us raise more funds through external sources, such as, hopefully, we're working on an NEH grant proposal to try to fund the translation of the tours that we'll be giving of this exhibit, and making sure that there are positions for students to work in the exhibit as docents and interpreters throughout the next academic year. I want to talk a little bit about how I came to know this project and how the project came about, to give you some context. So I had the chance to meet April DeSimone, who's here on the right. She is the principal of Designing the We and the designer of this exhibit. And when I met her in 2016, she was sharing her personal story about the research that led to the exhibit. She talked about how, as a graduate student, she went to the National Archives with a class led by Dr. Mindy Fulalove, who's here on the left. And she saw, yes, Dr. Fulalove is awesome. She actually was a visiting professor here at Barnard last semester. And she was taking students and community members to the National Archives to see the HOLC maps, the security maps that were created in the 30s that Mary will talk about in her presentation. And the HOLC maps defined the area of the Bronx that April grew up in as quote unquote hazardous, way back in 1937, long before her mother had purchased a home there. So the home that she grew up in eventually was threatened by fire from the burning of neighboring properties in the 1970s, when much of the Bronx was allowed to burn as fire stations were closed and landlords collected insurance for devastated properties. So when she saw these maps as a researcher, April talks often about how she felt the heartbreak, remembering her mother's experience trying to hold on to that home while the infrastructure crumbled around her. And she was burdened by the predatory financing of that home as a woman of color. That all of these experiences that April's family had were predetermined by a racist policy and a lack of care for those who would live in that community. So we commonly hear, just zooming out, we commonly hear references to the historical moment when the Bronx was burning, but it's not always that we hear what that meant, and the reality that many people were made homeless or had their lives turned upside down by this time. And they were also blamed for the condition of their own neighborhoods. Moving on. So after I met April, during this time, I was a librarian at Smith College. I had worked at Barnard previously, and April's story really resonated for me, not just personally, but also with the experiences of many, many students that I have met. I immediately thought that the students at Smith that I worked with should have access to this history. A lot of the students that I see coming into the library have a variety of experiences. Black students, low wealth students, recent immigrant students, all have lived experiences connected to April's story in many ways. And often they're looking for answers. The history of policies like redlining is a root cause for so many of the topics that they're bringing into library consultations. They're asking how and why we got here, to segregated schools, to massive wealth disparities, to over-policing of specific communities, to unequal outcomes in health. These are things that students really want to know about. So I had the opportunity to bring the exhibition to Smith just before the library would be torn down. So there was a little bit of room for experimentation. The exhibit was really popular. We were only up for 6 weeks and about 600 recorded visitors came. The panels and other programming was done with packed houses. We had 16 classes from across the 5 colleges in Western Mass who integrated the exhibit into their courses. The exhibit drew community college students, local legal aid organizations, librarians, activists from the whole region. Sometimes people would drive from Boston, which was 2 hours away. And students shared with me the experience of interacting with the exhibit. They felt that it was transformative for them, and it affirmed for them for many of them their lived experiences and the fact that those things that they've seen firsthand are actually worth researching. And that working to change these stark realities is both worthwhile and possible. Next slide.
Thank you, Miriam. And also thank you, Cammie, just for your enthusiasm and your introduction and for your support of this project. It's really extraordinary, and we are so happy to have you on board and in community with us for this project and so many other things. It wouldn't be Barnard if we didn't want to provide room and space for everyone's voice. So we want to take a moment to ask you to think about when was the last time you heard the term redlining and what was the context. So if you could just sort of think back in your recent memory, and if you feel comfortable, please share in the chat. We are trying to access knowledge in the room, and together we know so much more than we do individually. And I think that that's really part of the spirit of Barnard. So thinking through sort of your classes or even personal experience, when was the last time you heard the term redlining, and what was the context? And we'll give you some time to share in the chat.
So Cammie says, yesterday, while discussing the neighborhood I grew up in. Someone talks about Ta-Nehisi Coates, reading Ta-Nehisi Coates with their family book club. People have heard about it in the past presidential election, and now with voter suppression leading to the 2022 midterm election. Thank you. Erin says that she heard about it for the first time while training for political campaigns in 2002. The last time was a discussion with a history teacher a few months ago at a high school. Anna mentions talking with friends about the legacy of housing discrimination and its impact on educational segregation today. Ellen lives in California and sees that redlining is still included in resale documents. Have had to discuss that with realtors, yes. In coverage of Black Lives Matter in the media. Realtors, yes. We're still seeing this very present in the real estate industry. Raquel talks about working with her family on family history through the generations. So this is showing up. Constantly on the news, especially in George Floyd Memorial Square, where locals want to end redlining in that square in Minneapolis. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think we'll move on, but continue to please putting your thoughts in the chat. We love to have sort of an interactive discussion here as we move forward. So oftentimes I'm asked sort of what is redlining? It has come to mean a lot of different things and used in a variety of different contexts. So redlining was a practice of risk assessment. It was undertaken by the federal government, specifically the Homeowners Loan Corporation, to assess the value of properties for foreclosure protections in the wake of the Great Depression. A task force of government officials and representatives from real estate, finance, and insurance companies rated and mapped neighborhoods in some 239 cities across the country using the same formula. The presence of undesirable, quote unquote, racial elements became a defining feature with some attention paid to the age and quality of the buildings. Areas with high concentrations of white residents and new buildings were rated A as desirable, low risk, again, their words, and colored blue and green on the map, while neighborhoods with high or increasing concentrations of ethnic immigrants were designated as undesirable and colored with yellow on the map and given a C rating. Residents with high concentrations of Black residents incurred a quote unquote hazardous, obsolete, high risk rating and were colored red on the map with a D rating. And you see some of the examples there on the slide. What this did was basically to institutionalize a valuation structure and assessment of risk along segregated racialized lines. It informed the investment strategies of the industries that were involved in making the maps and provided a new language for discrimination and predatory practices contingent on racial identity. It enabled the extraction of wealth from residents in those redlined areas by landlords and solidified the devaluation of property by race. Redlining, however, did not create segregation in this country. Ad hoc practices that perpetuated and policed racial segregation in many areas included citizen-led violence, often sanctioned by the state. This past week, we commemorated 100 years since the Tulsa Race Massacre, where 300 people were killed by white mob violence, and the entire Greenwood neighborhood in Tulsa was destroyed during the event. There's been a lot of discussion of this particular event in the media, and I'd like to share with you a piece by historian Robin D.G. Kelly on that event that urges us to confront the systemic, genocidal, state-sanctioned racist violence that is pervasive in the United States even today. And unfortunately, sharing my screen, I can't put it in the chat, but I will as soon as I am able. Another practice was the practice of racial zoning. Racial zoning intertwined race into the planning, design, and development of cities and neighborhoods. In 1917, the Supreme Court found racial zoning violated the 14th Amendment. However, discrimination by individuals and organizations did not. This opened the door even wider for what had become a practice of legally binding and enforceable restrictive covenants. In deeds or alternative agreements prevented the sale of an individual property or even a collection of properties to a person of another race. The advertisement on the right appeared in the Washington Evening Star following the Supreme Court decision affirming the power of restrictive covenants to cover multiple residences on S Street Northwest between 18th Street and New Hampshire Avenue in Washington, D.C. In addition, predatory finance and loan structures extracted more wealth from Black homebuyers, while white homebuyers were presented with favorable terms. Still, leading up to the Great Depression, many neighborhoods in industrial cities were quite integrated. In 1934, as part of FDR's New Deal suite, the 1934 Housing Act was passed and created the Homeowners Loan Corporation and the Federal Housing Administration. The purpose of the HOLC was to refinance mortgages in default due to the Great Depression, to prevent foreclosure, and to expand homeownership opportunities. The Federal Housing Administration insured mortgages for private single-family residences, multifamily rental properties, hospitals, and residential care facilities. They created standards in the mortgage industry that did not exist prior to lower the risk. The federally backed 30-year mortgage with low interest rates was a tool that revolutionized the housing industry and gave confidence to builders and financiers, as well as expanded homeownership opportunities to those who could qualify. As we know, discrimination across the financial industry most often limited those opportunities to white homebuyers. The FHA also laid out very clear guidelines for how property owners could create racially restrictive covenants in deeds to prevent the sale of property to someone of a different racial identity. This quote is from the 1935 Underwriting Manual. If a neighborhood is to retain stability, it is necessary that properties shall continue to be occupied by the same social and racial classes. A change in social or racial occupancy generally leads to instability and a reduction of values. This is imperative to understand that this is a government document that guides the activities of industries and individuals and was basically sanctioning and encouraging the segregation and discrimination in home ownership. This, combined with the redlining of neighborhoods, institutionalized racial discrimination and housing practices in cities across the country. Many other policies and practices of discrimination, predation, and wealth extraction were then enabled by this set of policies and the visualization of this kind of data. Even when challenges to restrictive covenants were waged in court, social enforcement by white homeowners and their associations threatened and often enacted violence against Black homeowners and those seeking to purchase properties. Here is a quote from one such residential organization describing what it might mean for a racialized buyer in their neighborhood. The discomfort that a violator of these rules may suffer may include such things as having his realtor blacklisted from business activity in the community, or it may mean that the buyer will be given a lot of difficulty in obtaining sewer, water, roadway, and other services. Sometimes it means that his driveway is blocked off, his children are roughed up, and his property is damaged or littered up. Sometimes it only means the family is given a very cold shoulder by the community. And this is from Seattle, Washington Neighborhood Resident Survey in 1953. So again, this is evolution of the very real citizen-led, state-sanctioned violence that we see in Tulsa being institutionalized in a new form and enacted. These practices and policies informed the major urban development policies of the 20th century. Between 1955 and 1966, urban renewal policies sought to improve housing stock in cities across the country, but ended up displacing more than 300,000 families, 2/3 of whom were people of color. The Highway Acts of 1944 and 1956 encouraged the construction of highways through urban neighborhoods. A majority of those demolished thriving African-American neighborhoods, like the construction of the Cross Bronx Expressway in the Bronx and I-81 in Syracuse that leveled the 15th Ward. Suburban housing was largely only available to white homeowners due to the FHA requirements, and even those Black residents who were successful in securing financing were often subjected to violent social enforcement by neighbors. As white people abandoned cities for the suburbs and the economy moved away from manufacturing, shrinking urban revenue streams in the 1970s and 80s prompted austerity measures in the form of municipal disinvestment strategies like planned shrinkage, where local officials cut service to fire, emergency response, and garbage pickup. As Miriam mentioned, April DeSimone was motivated by her experience with some of these planned shrinkage policies in the Bronx, which left the Bronx to burn, housing in the Bronx to burn for nearly a decade. Finally, the urban renaissance in the late 1990s and early 2000s prompted a wave of public and private investment that resulted in the gentrification displacement of longtime residents in newly desirable neighborhoods across the country. The timeline of the exhibit explores these periods and policies in greater detail, but each of these has been informed by those red lines drawn on those maps in the 1930s. And we have nearly 100 years of policy that has been affected. The cumulative effect over time has contributed to widening inequality across a number of impact areas in the 21st century. One of the biggest predictors of your health is your zip code. The novel coronavirus pandemic revealed just how uneven health outcomes can be across neighborhoods. A study by the National Community Reinvestment Coalition found significant associations between redlining and pre-existing conditions for heightened risk of morbidity in COVID-19 patients. Schools are tied to housing. Schools located in formerly redlined areas are more likely to be disinvested, lower performing, with less access to external resources. Sociologist Danica Gordon finds that predominantly Black neighborhoods are simultaneously over-policed when it comes to surveillance and social control, and under-policed when it comes to emergency services. A few classes at Barnard have already taken inspiration from the project and started to carry out work along some of these areas. Professor Chandler Miranda's Race, Space, and Urban Schools class put together a series of podcasts, and you can hear students exploring the connection between redlining in schools and school inequality more broadly. And Beck Jordan Young's course, co-taught with Dr. Mindy Philolove, Pandemics of Harlem, has proposed some stories that we hope to feature in the exhibition. In contemporary studies of urban heat as it relates to climate change, formerly redlined neighborhoods can be more than 5 degrees hotter than other neighborhoods in the city. This chart shows the effect in Portland, Oregon, and cities like Baltimore and New York have demonstrated even greater disparities. One of the great benefits of this project is that we are very connected with our sciences, and we have several science faculty who serve on the planning committee, and it has been such an education for all of us to be able to make even greater links across disciplines as we work together on this project. Most profoundly has been the long-term effects of redlining and housing inequality and wealth accumulation, which most often happens in this country through home ownership. The devaluation of Black neighborhoods penalized homeowners on average $48,000 per home, which amounts to $156 billion in cumulative losses. This contributes to a staggering Black-white wealth gap, where the net worth of a typical white family is near 10 times greater than that of a Black family. In bringing Undesign the Redline to Barnard this fall, we will engage with the ongoing impact of redlining across a spectrum of disciplines and areas of interest, while we seek to figure out and uncover and reveal what is the impact of redlining, even as we attempt to address it.
So thanks, Mary. Right now, we're we want to describe to you some of the components of the project. We've broken the project into 5 major components or stages that culminate in the exhibit's opening. But of course, there's a lot that will happen after the exhibit is installed. The reading group, as I mentioned, has been meeting as we described for several months, and those sessions are archived on our website as well as through our syllabus component, which we're building as a website resource. The community advisory and student advisory committee building process has happened, and now we have a really dynamic team of partners who are keeping this process relevant to the stakeholders that they represent. For example, connecting us with student groups and building partnerships with community institutions. In 2 weeks, the CEP, the Center for Engaged Pedagogy, will host a 4-day institute for 12 faculty who are planning fall courses around the exhibit. They're coming from microbiology, theater, first-year writing, education, environmental science, sociology, Africana studies. And we're excited about this mixture of people and perspectives, and we're going to be exploring creating assignments and facilitating dialogue about difficult topics. And we're going to hopefully see how faculty might work together across disciplines. We're going to open the exhibit in the fall with a symposium that we'll describe a little bit later. And because we're connected to the Year of Science initiative on campus, we'll be working on ways to have more conversations, as Mary mentioned, led by the folks in STEM who are on our team, about how the exhibit provides an important lens and starting place for students studying STEM. We want to tell the story as well of Barnard alums, such as Vernice Miller-Travis, class of 1980, who helped to produce research that introduced the term environmental racism. And she co-founded the Harlem-based group We Act for Environmental Justice. So those are some of the stories that we'd like to tell in this process. One of the components I wanted to describe a little bit more is the hashtag undesigned syllabus, which is a compilation of all the readings that were offered or suggested for our reading group sessions. And we're building a website to showcase this as a take-home resource for the exhibit, which will allow visitors to curate their own playlists of readings, films, podcast episodes, and more to discuss, to explore these topics. We want to encourage people to create their own study groups and to think about learning this history outside of the classroom or even the campus, thinking about how you explore these histories in community with others. Some of the topics of the reading groups have included investing in restorative infrastructure for community ownership and control, such as community-owned banks, the politics of zoning, and looking at how zoning has an impact on affordable housing, changing the narratives about public housing by understanding public housing from the perspective of residents. Those are a few of the topics. We felt that we could not host this program without building genuine relationships with community organizations, as has been mentioned many times today. And our community, we want to make sure that the exhibit is accessible and useful to residents of Harlem and Northern Manhattan and the Bronx. And our community outreach subcommittee has been thinking about how to do that. So one of the strategies we used is to create a list of local organizations and to think about, as individuals, where we have actual working relationships with people in those organizations. And from there, we allocated funds to offer honoraria to community advisory board members to join us to be part of the process. Each advisor is asked to link the project to their expertise in a way that connects easily for the work that they're already doing. So for example, Zakia Collier is a curator of digital collections at the Schomburg Center, the Schomburg Research Library in Harlem. And one of her collections is a collection of hashtag syllabi. So she's helping us look at how to create public education materials and use the examples that she already knows about as inspiration, and how to build the website with the features that we want. Ariana Allensworth is not pictured here, but she's an artist who's joined us from the Laundromat Project and the Anti-Eviction Mapping Project. And her work tells the stories of people who've been displaced in several cities. So she spoke in one of our reading groups about that. Pam Phillips is a staff member of BCRW who was for many years a resident of public housing and has started the Poverty and Housing Working Group at BCRW, and they have done some digital oral history projects and timeline projects focusing on changing the narratives about public housing. And we've also reached out to students in a similar way, but slightly different. We created 5 spots on our committee for students, we've raised money to compensate students for being part of the planning process and invited students to apply for the position, and saying explicitly that we want to increase opportunities for students of color to have leadership roles on campus. We had over 75 applications for those 5 slots, and there were many students who wanted to shared with us about the work that they're already doing around housing justice, confronting inequities in their communities. It was really inspiring to see what Barnard students are already up to. And the 5 students that we've selected have been incredible peers and contributors. They are writing and editing a section of the exhibit called Stories from the Line, which highlights local examples of redlining history. And Makako Murphy, who's pictured here, is leading that process.
Next month, we will be bringing together faculty, staff, students across the college and community practitioners and activists to consider together how we might undesign the red line, and in the process, co-design the final panel of the exhibition. We're really excited about this process. We're hoping to have as much participation as possible. April DeSimone, who has been working with us, is going to participate in the design charrette. Design charrette, for those of you who may not be familiar with the term, is a tool that's often used in planning or architectural community design to bring together stakeholders from the community to co-create the plan or to work on a design program for a particular site or neighborhood or city. And so we're hoping to do that with the exhibition, and we look forward to the many voices that we have been participating with and sort of expanding it out even further as we go along.
So we will install the exhibit in the Milstein Center with a date of early October. All of these customized components will be part of the installation. And as we mentioned before, we're going to be working with a team of students who will be student associates working for the library and providing guided tours. And if we are successful in raising enough funding, we'll be able to translate April's tour of the exhibit and make it available in several languages for self-guided tours as well. The exhibit will be accompanied by a symposium, a 2-day event that highlights research and community engagement projects by faculty, students, and community members, and examines this issue in many different ways, including thinking about how have we developed these mental modes of hierarchical value, and how are they part of the lived environment in ways that we might take for granted. The presentations will hopefully open and close with one-on-one conversations with public thinkers whose work seeks to repair the legacies of redlining and racialized violence through their work in policy, politics, journalism, architecture, design, climate justice, and technology. We won't release the names of those people yet because that is not confirmed yet, but we're excited about it. Yes, and now we have a survey for you.
Yes, we have a survey. Once again, we want to reach out to you and give you an opportunity to participate in this process. We could take 3 minutes to consider the following questions, and Miriam will hopefully put the survey into the chat. And if you would like to be involved or get updates about the project going forward, please feel free to share with us your email, your name and your email. And there's no pressure to complete the survey, but we would really like to capture as many responses and voices as possible in this process. And anything you share will be filtered into our data collection from the charrette to help us design that final panel. And the question is basically, given what we now know about redlining and its far-reaching effects, what are some of the ways we might begin to undesign the red line? Are there examples at work in your community, neighborhood, or city? Might there be some structure? What might be some structural solutions? How about at the individual level? Consider potential actions, small and large, from the micro to macro levels. It's going to take a lot to undo the sedimentation of inequality that this has created. And again, if you would be so willing, please do feel free to share with us in the chat. We'd love to hear what you're thinking.
Lavia is asking how they can access the presentation, and we're happy to share. We've shared our presentation with the organizers, and we're happy to have them share that with you as well. So again, we want to encourage you to get in touch with us directly. And if there's a way that you would like to be involved in the exhibit or the programming, let us know. And look out for announcements about the exhibit when it opens in October. And I guess we'll pass the mic to Cammie, unless Mary, you wanted to say anything else.
I just want to say thank you so much. We look forward to your questions and having a fruitful discussion. We have plenty of time, I think.
Thank you both so much for this amazing presentation. This was just so wonderful to see the journey and how much you have done in just a year time frame in the midst of the pandemic. So this is powerful, great work. And I want to make sure that we have enough time to answer some of the questions that we've received. And I'm just going to jump right into it because the first question touches on a lot of things that you both have mentioned about, you know, property ownership and housing inequities and the devaluing of BIPOC communities and their property and how this has led to this wealth gap. And the first question we got was about, do you consider redlining as a strategy to legitimize racism and property ownership? And I was curious of your thoughts, either one of you, about this.
I'm happy to sort of take that one on. So I think that redlining technically was ended as discrimination legally was ended, but as we know, the practices have continued. And I think that it is part of a culture of real estate development and finance as well. We've seen studies and even sort of in popular media stories, investigative journalism demonstrating that some of these practices are still alive and well. I think that when you look at maps of cities, you can't help but notice that in many cases, neighborhoods that were redlined in the 30s have not changed significantly. Many of those neighborhoods still remain. And I think that it becomes part of the culture and the way of doing things. I don't think that necessarily people would invoke it as a strategy today, but it's become so institutionalized and ingrained in the fabric of the way that we plan cities and financial institutions finance them, and the way that we understand things. I mean, this project has been so enlightening and illuminating along so many different lines. Even this past year, digital infrastructure has become so important, but redline neighborhoods were not given the same broadband infrastructure. So internet access tends to cost more and be more spotty in those areas of the city. So we see all of these outcomes that originate from this particular practice and its far-reaching impacts, even if it's not expressly continued in the same form.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mary. And I wanted to continue with that because this next question kind of continues on with this redistricting line. I know I see this where I live in a rural community where there's like a redistricting committee that's coming together to redraw, I would say, some of our districts. And this question was about, are you aware of any research about how redlining impacts drawing congressional districts? It's okay if not, and please use the chat if others are aware of this, because I did see an answer about this, about that at the individual level, realizing the political districting impact and electoral college vote count. We have to make a decision around where do we locate and how do we support particular communities, especially the rural communities around this, where I can tell you that this is something that's very common.
Yeah, there's definitely a relationship between redistricting and gerrymandering and redlining and the census, and thinking about the strategies that have been used to avoid allocating political power to majority minority districts, or Black, in particular, Black community representation. I cannot cite somebody off the top of my head, but I thank you for bringing that up as an important thing for us to put in our syllabus. It's come up many, many times. And of course, it's really important to the fights that are happening in the city right now around the use of land and the rezoning of certain communities like Inwood, where so whenever there's rapid change, there's a shift in how land use might be allocated and who's making those decisions, who has access to the decision-making process. So yeah, this is something that we want to be able to explore. And we're hoping that some of our, the professors that are, working on those issues will also be part of the project.
Thank you.
If I could just add briefly, there's been a lot of work among political scientists that have lined up congressional redistricting maps using GIS over historic redlining maps. And some of those can be found. I think there's one on ArcGIS of North Carolina, I believe, that shows some startling correlations. And I think also, as Miriam mentioned, the census is a huge part of how district lines are drawn. And we know demographers have found that in formerly redlined neighborhoods or neighborhoods that, excuse me, fall into that profile, there's less census counts tend to be lower, less time spent in those neighborhoods counting, and sort of an effort to actually undercount in some cases. So there's definitely a connection, and one that we should definitely explore further in our work here. Thank you for bringing that up.
Good, thank you.
I actually found the North Carolina GIS, and I'm going to post that in the chat as you were talking.
Oh, good, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? You have a little bit of time. If you would like to ask anything. If no one has any other questions, is there any final words, Miriam or Mary, in regards to how individuals can find more information or join a newsletter or listserv, just to find ways to be involved and support your work moving forward? You have a busy fall ahead, so I'm sure individuals are interested in supporting you.
Yes, on our website.
Oh, so sorry.
Is there nothing?
I think I see a hand waving. Ellen, are you waving your hand?
I was going to ask
Okay, sorry, Miriam.
if you were planning any kind of community information and awareness activities so that people will even look at their deeds when they buy a house and see if the redlining is still there, because it is in California. It's listed on some of the deeds. It hasn't been removed. And develop that kind of awareness so that people begin to understand how much it's impacted where they live and who can move into their communities.
Yes, thanks for that question, Ellen. Something that is going to be harder for people who are not in person to experience and appreciate, but when you are viewing the exhibit up close, it invites you to post stories from your own lived experience. And so one of the things that happened at Smith is that we saw the timeline and all of the exhibit covered in tags where people told stories like that one, how they had seen the deed to the home that they purchased in Amherst and saw the language still excluding Black residents. It's very moving to see how this is something that a lot of people know intimately and really haven't had a place to talk about it. So that's what we talk about when we say, like, after we launch the exhibit, there's going to be so much more, because it really does kind of invite a public archive of experiences and shows us that we all have some relationship to this history. And something I forgot to mention also is that, you know, we are not blind to, and we're openly confronting the fact that Columbia University is one of the biggest landowners in New York City, and that a lot of these experiences are very urgently felt by members of the local area, and we're hoping that they will be willing to share what Columbia's expansion has meant for them, and to help us understand how to move forward in a different way with community.
Thank you.
And I'll just add, Ellen, you can definitely, you're welcome to join us in our remaining reading group sessions. We've had some fantastic participation. One of the bright spots of having to go virtual is that we've had so much participation from across the country. Folks from Ohio, folks from North Carolina, California have been able to Zoom in and really enriched the discussion that we've had. So I think you put your contact information in the chat, so we'll be happy to add you to the list.
I think I already did that. Yeah. Good, thank you.
So we have another question from Sharon Johnson in regards to the Indigenous community and land. How is the occupancy of Native Indigenous land being included in this project?
Yes, thank you for that question, Sharon. We have included the settler colonial experience that is being experienced still by Indigenous people as part of the stories from the line. And throughout, we're looking for ways to talk about contemporary experiences for Indigenous people. For example, the encroachment on Indigenous lands for things like pipelines. But what we've learned through talking in the past several sessions is more about the Muncie Lenape people and the Lenape communities that inhabited New York City prior and where they are now. So, you know, Broadway was a thoroughfare for the Lenape people, and it's where our campus sits. But we now know that many Lenape are living in Oklahoma and other parts of the country and trying to preserve their communities. And so we're looking still at how we might continue to tell those stories through the exhibit and invite programming from students, because there are Indigenous students on campus. So that's something that's still in development for us.
Any other questions from anyone? You can use the chat or you can wave your hand. I'm scrolling through as quickly as possible to catch anyone. Okay. If not, if there aren't any other questions, I would like to thank Miriam and Mary for their fantastic presentation. And looking forward to collaborating with them in this upcoming year with this important project that I know the community is really excited about. And with that being said, I'm going to transition it to Raquel, who will give us our closing remarks.
This has been an incredible talk, and I'm honored to have been able to be here to listen to the incredible work that Barnard women and community are doing. So kudos and hats off to all of you. So thank you, Cammie and Miriam and Mary, for sharing this important work with us all. And to our guests, thank you again for joining us today. We hope you will join us for more Reimagined events. And please visit reunion.barnard.edu to learn about upcoming programs.
Thank you.